First of all, I'm out in front of the Supreme Court, and there is a long line of people here who are waiting to get into these arguments. This is such a big case that it's really drawing a crowd. But so far, there has been a lot of pushback. John Sauer is arguing on behalf of the Trump administration right now, and he's arguing to a court of originalists, of textualists, of people who rely on statutory interpretation. And Vlad, they keep asking him about the way he's trying to use the language here to regulate importation. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was pushing back a lot on him. She said, can you point to any place in the statutory code, in the history, where it was used to confer tariff authority? And she is someone who really, really is strong on statutory interpretation, Vlad. Another one of the justices just said that to have the president's power trump congressional power when it comes to taxation seems to neutralize those powers. So this is really a really key case about the balance of power. John Sauer has been arguing that the president has broad authority when it comes to foreign affairs, that he has the inherent power to regulate foreign commerce. He also said that these are regulatory tariffs.
Okay, so Donald Trump just crossed a line that no president in American history has ever crossed, and we're watching a constitutional crisis unfold in real time. Trump is calling for the arrest and impeachment of a federal judge, not just criticizing him, not just attacking him on social media, actually trying to have Judge James Boasberg arrested and removed from the bench through impeachment. And it's not just talk. On November 3rd, just days ago, Congressman Brandon Gill from Texas filed formal articles of impeachment against Judge Boasberg. This is happening. A sitting president is using his allies in Congress to try to destroy a federal judge who ruled against him. And the reason Trump wants Boasberg gone? Because Boasberg blocked Trump's deportation orders and authorized subpoenas and criminal investigations targeting Trump and his allies. This is retaliation. This is abuse of power. This is a president trying to dismantle the independence of the judiciary because judges won't do what he wants. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Conferred that power. And then Sauer has also been hearkening back to a case related to Nixon. It was an earlier version of the law that IEPA now is, and Nixon had used that to invoke his ability to tax. And so the Trump administration is relying on that quite a bit, but the justices are really pushing back.
Can you believe this? Trump posted on Truth Social, calling Boasberg a radical left lunatic of a judge and saying he should be impeached. That was back in March. But Trump didn't stop there. He's been attacking Boasberg for months, calling him crooked, saying he's weaponizing the judiciary, demanding that Congress take action. And now his loyalists in the House have actually done it. They filed impeachment articles accusing Boasberg of abusing his power. The specific claim is that Boasberg authorized secret subpoenas for something called the Arctic Frost investigation, which apparently is targeting Trump and several Republican senators. Trump's allies are saying Boasberg is using his position to go after conservatives for political reasons. But here's what they're not telling you. Those subpoenas were authorized as part of legitimate criminal investigations. That's what judges do. They review evidence presented by prosecutors and decide whether subpoenas are justified. Boasberg was doing his job, and now he's being impeached for it. And it gets worse. Trump's Department of Justice, led by Attorney General Pam Bondi, has been threatening judges with criminal prosecution. In April, the DOJ actually tried to charge a state judge with obstruction. That's unprecedented. The federal government going after a state judge for how they ruled in a case. Bondi has been making public statements saying, "We will come after you and we will prosecute you. We will find you." That's a direct threat to any judge who might rule against the Trump administration. Think about what that means. Judges are supposed to be independent. They're supposed to make decisions based on law and evidence without fear of retaliation. But Trump is creating an environment where judges know that if they rule against him, they might face impeachment or criminal charges. That's how you destroy judicial independence. That's how you turn the courts into a rubber stamp for whatever the president wants. Chief Justice John Roberts saw what was happening and did something incredibly rare. He issued a public statement defending Judge Boasberg and the independence of the judiciary. Roberts said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that for more than 2 centuries, impeachment has not been an appropriate response to disagreements about judicial decisions. He said there's a normal appellate review process for when people think a judge got something wrong. You appeal the decision to a higher court. You don't impeach the judge. Roberts was basically telling Trump and Congress that what they're doing is unconstitutional and dangerous. And the fact that Roberts felt compelled to speak out publicly tells you how serious this situation is. Chief justices almost never comment on political controversies. They stay above the fray. But Roberts looked at Trump's attacks on Boasberg in the impeachment articles and decided he had to say something to defend the integrity of the judicial branch. Come on, you know where this is headed, right? If Congress can impeach judges just because they make rulings that the president doesn't like, then judicial independence is dead. Every judge will know that their job is on the line if they rule the wrong way. They'll be afraid to block presidential actions even when those actions are clearly illegal. They'll be afraid to authorize investigations into presidential misconduct. They'll essentially become extensions of the executive branch instead of being an independent check on executive power. That's exactly what Trump wants. He wants judges who will do what he tells them, who will let him govern without any legal constraints, and he's willing to destroy the separation of powers to get it. The timing of all this is crucial. Trump is facing multiple criminal investigations. He's dealing with court orders blocking his policies on immigration, on deportations, on tariffs, on all kinds of issues. Every time a judge rules against him, Trump attacks that judge personally and claims they're biased or corrupt. But with Boasberg, Trump has gone further. He's not just attacking, he's trying to remove Boasberg from the bench entirely. And if he succeeds, if Congress actually impeaches Boasberg, it will send a message to every other federal judge: rule against Trump and you're next. That's authoritarianism. That's what happens in countries where the rule of law has broken down and the judiciary is just another tool of whoever's in power. And it's happening here in America right now. Let's break down exactly what Trump and his allies are trying to do, why it's so dangerous, and what it means for American democracy. All right, so let's dig into the specifics of what Judge Boasberg actually did that made Trump so angry, because understanding that is key to seeing how absurd these impeachment articles are. James Boasberg is a federal district judge in Washington, D.C. He was appointed by President Obama in 2011, which automatically makes him suspicious to Trump supporters who think any Obama appointee must be a partisan Democrat. But Boasberg has a reputation as a serious, by-the-book judge who follows the law regardless of politics. He's handled major cases involving government surveillance, national security, and now Trump-era controversies. In the cases that sparked Trump's fury, Boasberg did two main things. First, he blocked Trump's deportation orders that we talked about in an earlier story. Trump was trying to conduct mass deportations using emergency powers, and Boasberg issued a temporary restraining order saying, hold on, these deportations might be violating due process rights and we need to sort out the legal issues before you start putting people on planes. That ruling alone would have been enough to make Trump mad. But then Boasberg did something else that really set Trump off. He authorized subpoenas as part of a criminal investigation called Arctic Frost. Now the details of Arctic Frost are still mostly secret because it's an ongoing investigation. But from what's been reported, it involves potential obstruction of justice and abuse of power by Trump and several Republican senators. Prosecutors presented evidence to Boasberg showing that there was probable cause to believe crimes had been committed and that certain documents and testimony were needed for the investigation. Boasberg reviewed that evidence in a closed hearing, which is standard procedure for sensitive investigations, and authorized the subpoenas. That's literally what judges do. When prosecutors are investigating crimes, they go to a judge and say, here's our evidence that a crime occurred. Here's why we need these specific materials. Please authorize subpoenas so we can get them. The judge reviews the request and either approves it or denies it based on whether there's sufficient legal justification. Boasberg approved the subpoenas, which means he found that prosecutors had shown probable cause and that the subpoenas were properly tailored to the investigation. But because one of the targets was Trump and because the investigation is sensitive, Trump and his allies are claiming that Boasberg is weaponizing the judiciary to go after conservatives. They're saying he authorized secret subpoenas without proper justification, that he's acting as an arm of the deep state, that he's abusing his power to target political opponents. But none of that is based on any actual evidence. The proceedings were closed because that's how grand jury investigations work. The subpoenas were authorized because Boasberg found legal justification for them. This is the normal functioning of the criminal justice system, but Trump is framing it as corrupt and partisan because he doesn't like being investigated. The impeachment articles filed by Congressman Brandon Gill reflect Trump's narrative. They accuse Boasberg of abusing his power by authorizing subpoenas in a politically motivated investigation. They claim Boasberg is weaponizing the judiciary against conservatives. They argue that his actions warrant removal from office. But here's the problem with these accusations. Impeachment of federal judges is supposed to be reserved for serious misconduct, things like bribery, treason, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Making a ruling that the president disagrees with is not a high crime or misdemeanor. Even if Boasberg had made a legal error, which there's no evidence he did, that's what the appeals process is for. You appeal the decision to a higher court. You don't impeach the judge. The impeachment articles are essentially saying that any judge who rules against Trump or authorizes investigations into Trump's conduct should be removed from office. That's not a legal standard. That's a loyalty test. Are you kidding me? Like, this is so blatantly unconstitutional and dangerous that even some Republicans are uncomfortable with it. Chief Justice Roberts felt he had to speak out, which, as I mentioned, is incredibly rare. Roberts is a conservative appointed by George W. Bush. He's not some liberal activist, but even he can see that what Trump is doing threatens the entire judicial system. Roberts' statement was carefully worded, but the message was clear. Impeachment is not a tool for punishing judges who make decisions you disagree with. There are proper legal channels for challenging judicial decisions. Using impeachment this way would destroy judicial independence and undermine the separation of powers that's fundamental to the Constitution. But Trump doesn't care about those constitutional principles. He's made it clear throughout both his terms that he views the justice system as something that should serve him personally. Judges who rule in his favor are great judges. Judges who rule against him are corrupt, biased, and should be impeached. Prosecutors who investigate him are conducting witch hunts. Prosecutors who go after his enemies are just doing their jobs. It's all about loyalty and personal benefit. And now, with Attorney General Pam Bondi running the Justice Department, Trump has someone who's willing to actually follow through on threats against judges. Bondi's statements about coming after judges and prosecuting them are chilling. This is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States openly threatening members of the judiciary for doing their jobs. The attempt to charge a state judge with obstruction is a perfect example of how far this has gone. In April, Trump's DOJ tried to bring federal charges against a state court judge who had ruled in a way that Trump didn't like. The legal theory was that the judge had obstructed justice by making a ruling that interfered with federal law enforcement. But that theory is absurd. State judges make rulings all the time that affect federal matters. That's how federalism works. You don't criminally prosecute a judge for making a ruling you disagree with. You appeal the ruling or you ask a federal court to intervene. The fact that Trump's DOJ even tried to bring charges shows how willing they are to abuse the criminal justice system to intimidate judges. Come on. Think about what happens if this becomes the new normal. If presidents can threaten judges with impeachment or criminal prosecution whenever they don't like a ruling, then judges stop being independent. They start ruling based on what they think the president wants rather than what the law requires. Cases involving presidential power or presidential misconduct become impossible to adjudicate fairly because judges know their jobs and their freedom are at risk if they rule the wrong way. That's the end of the rule of law. That's the transition from a constitutional democracy to an authoritarian system where the executive branch is above any legal accountability. The impeachment articles against Boasberg have basically zero chance of actually removing him from office. Even if the House votes to impeach, which is possible if Republicans stay loyal to Trump, the Senate would need a 2/3 majority to convict and remove. That's not happening. There are enough Republican senators who understand the constitutional implications and who won't vote to remove a judge for making legally justified rulings. But the point of filing the articles isn't really to remove Boasberg. The point is to intimidate him and every other federal judge. The point is to send a message that if you cross Trump, he will come after you with everything he has. He'll attack you publicly. He'll get his allies in Congress to impeach you. He'll have his Justice Department investigate you for potential crimes. Even if none of that ultimately succeeds in removing you, it makes your life hell, and it warns other judges not to follow your example. This strategy has been effective in other contexts. Trump has bullied prosecutors, investigators, and government officials into backing down or resigning by making their lives miserable. Some people decide it's not worth the personal and professional cost to stand up to him. But federal judges have life tenure specifically to protect them from this kind of pressure. They can't be fired, their salaries can't be reduced, they're supposed to be insulated from political retaliation so they can make unpopular decisions when the law requires it. Trump is testing whether those protections are sufficient or whether he can find other ways to bend judges to his will through impeachment threats and criminal investigations. Okay, so let's break down what this means for regular people and for the future of American democracy. Because this isn't just inside baseball legal drama, this affects everyone. The independence of the judiciary is one of the fundamental pillars of constitutional government. It's what separates democracies from authoritarian regimes. In a democracy, when the government violates your rights, you can go to court and a judge will evaluate your case based on law and evidence, not based on what the government wants. In an authoritarian regime, the courts are controlled by whoever's in power and they rubber stamp whatever the government does. The reason we have an independent judiciary is to protect people from government abuse. If the government can fire or intimidate judges who rule against it, then going to court becomes pointless because you know the judge is just going to side with the government no matter what. Trump's attacks on Judge Boasberg and the broader threats against judges are pushing us toward that authoritarian model. If judges know they might be impeached or prosecuted for ruling against the president, they stop being independent. They start making decisions based on self-preservation rather than legal principle. That doesn't just affect cases involving Trump or the federal government. It affects every case in the justice system, because judges throughout the judiciary watch what happens to their colleagues. If they see that standing up for the law against presidential pressure can destroy your career and maybe even your freedom, they're going to be much less willing to do it. That chilling effect spreads throughout the entire system. Now let's talk about what impeachment of federal judges is supposed to look like, because there is a legitimate constitutional process for removing judges who engage in serious misconduct. Federal judges serve during good behavior, which means they have lifetime appointments, but can be removed if they commit impeachable offenses. Over the course of American history, only about 15 federal judges have been impeached and only 8 have been convicted and removed. The judges who were removed had committed actual crimes or serious ethical violations. Things like bribery, perjury, tax evasion, sexual assault. These were cases where there was clear evidence that the judge had violated the law or engaged in conduct that made them unfit to serve. The impeachment and removal process worked properly in those cases. It removed judges who were corrupt or criminal while preserving judicial independence for judges who were simply doing their jobs. What Trump is trying to do with Boasberg is completely different. There's no allegation that Boasberg committed a crime. There's no claim that he took bribes or engaged in any unethical conduct. The only accusation is that he made rulings Trump didn't like. He blocked deportation orders, and he authorized subpoenas in a criminal investigation. Those are judicial acts. Judges are supposed to be absolutely immune from consequences for their judicial acts. That immunity exists precisely so that judges can make unpopular or controversial decisions without fear of retaliation. If you don't like a judicial decision, you appeal it. You don't impeach the judge. Using impeachment to punish judicial decisions you disagree with turns impeachment from a tool for removing corrupt judges into a weapon for controlling judicial outcomes. Can you believe we're even having to explain this? Like, these are basic civics concepts that every American should understand. Separation of powers, judicial independence, checks and balances. These aren't abstract ideas. They're the foundation of how our government is supposed to work. But Trump either doesn't understand these principles or doesn't care about them. He sees the judiciary as an obstacle to his power rather than as a co-equal branch of government. And a significant portion of his base agrees with him. They've been told for years that activist judges are undermining democracy by striking down policies that voters supported. There's some legitimate debate to be had about the proper role of courts in a democracy, but Trump has taken that debate and twisted it into an argument that judges who rule against him should be removed or imprisoned. The political dynamics here are really important. Republicans in Congress face a choice. Do they go along with Trump's impeachment of Judge Boasberg, knowing it's constitutionally dubious and dangerous for judicial independence? Or do they break with Trump and defend the judge, knowing they'll face backlash from Trump's base? Most House Republicans will probably vote to impeach because they're terrified of primaries and they know Trump supporters will punish them if they don't show loyalty. But Senate Republicans are in a different position. The Senate is supposed to be more deliberative, more institutionally minded. Senators have longer terms, and they're supposed to take constitutional responsibilities like impeachment trials seriously. If the House impeaches Boasberg and sends articles to the Senate, there's a real chance that enough Republican senators will vote to acquit to prevent removal. Not because they like Boasberg or agree with his rulings, but because they understand that removing a judge for making legitimate judicial decisions would set a catastrophic precedent. Democrats are in a tricky spot too. Obviously, they're going to oppose the impeachment as unconstitutional and authoritarian, but they also have to be careful about how they defend Boasberg. If they make it too partisan, if they turn it into a Democrats versus Republicans fight, then Republican senators who might be inclined to vote against removal will feel pressure to support their party. The best strategy for Democrats is probably to frame this as a constitutional issue that transcends partisanship, to highlight statements from conservative legal scholars and former Republican officials who oppose the impeachment, and to emphasize that what Trump is doing threatens judicial independence regardless of which party is in power. Now let's talk about what happens if Trump succeeds in removing Boasberg or in creating an environment where judges are too scared to rule against him. The consequences would be catastrophic. Every case involving presidential power would essentially be decided in the president's favor, because judges would know that ruling against him could end their careers. Trump could continue his mass deportations without judicial oversight. He could impose tariffs without judicial review. He could prosecute his political enemies without judges questioning whether the prosecutions are legitimate. Any constraint on presidential power that requires judicial enforcement would become meaningless. That's not a democracy. That's an elected dictatorship where the president is essentially above the law. The international implications are significant too. America's credibility as a defender of rule of law and democratic values has already been damaged by Trump's attacks on institutions during his first term and the continued chaos during his second term. But if the U.S. starts impeaching judges for political reasons, it puts us in the same category as authoritarian regimes like Russia, China, and various dictatorships where the courts are just tools of whoever's in power. That undermines American soft power and makes it harder to criticize human rights abuses and democratic backsliding in other countries. How can we lecture other nations about judicial independence when we're destroying our own? One more thing to consider is the precedent this sets for future presidents. Let's say Trump loses the next election and a Democrat takes over. That Democrat will have watched Trump use impeachment threats and criminal prosecutions against judges. Will they be tempted to do the same thing? Will they file impeachment articles against conservative judges who strike down progressive policies? If Trump normalizes the weaponization of impeachment against the judiciary, it becomes a tool that both parties might use going forward. That would be a race to the bottom that destroys judicial independence permanently. The only way to prevent that spiral is to draw a clear line. Now that impeaching judges for their rulings is unconstitutional and unacceptable regardless of who's in power. So yeah, Trump's attempt to arrest and impeach Judge Boasberg is a huge deal. It's an attack on one of the most fundamental principles of American constitutional government. It's happening because Trump is facing legal accountability that he wants to escape and because he genuinely believes judges should serve him rather than serving the law. The impeachment articles filed by Congressman Gill are the formal manifestation of that attitude. They're not going to succeed in removing Boasberg, but they're going to intimidate judges and contribute to the erosion of judicial independence. Chief Justice Roberts tried to stop this by speaking out publicly, but it's not clear that his words will be enough. Congress has to defend the judiciary by rejecting these impeachment articles. Republican senators in particular have to decide whether they're going to protect constitutional principles or whether they're going to enable Trump's authoritarian impulses. The stakes couldn't be higher. If judicial independence falls, if judges become tools of presidential power rather than checks on it, American democracy as we know it is over. Stay tuned because this impeachment process is just beginning, and the next few months will determine whether our constitutional system can survive this assault.